Well, hello everyone, and how good it is that even in COVID time, we can come together for some sharing. I have to tell you, this is a most unusual way for me to do a presentation. I want to tell you though, I am living proof that you can teach an old dog new tricks. We know that Francis, we know we have a hard time that we're facing into. We're facing a pandemic that we don't know how it's going to end or how it's going to work out. We know the consequences of some of this. The fallout is unemployment. It's the loss of real contact, the loss of getting together to have fun times. And if that's not enough to contend with, there's the very reality of racism and of all the trails and paths that need to be taken to come to terms with it on so many different levels. And throw into the mix the chaotic and polarization of government. So how do we respond to any of this, even in a small part of this? What is our internal as well as our external response? We talk about what would Mother Cabrini do. I want to say from the get-go, I'm not sure that anyone can say with any degree of certainty how she or anyone else would do something in the current circumstances. But there can be inferences. And I think it's best we don't try to make a hard and fast fact of what Mother would do. But I think we can dive into her life and her charism to see what would motivate her to make any decision. I think her charism is a wonderful doorway into what we might possibly decide to do and how we decide to do it. So I'm not going to be telling the whole story of Mother's life. However, I'm going to pull out some aspects of her life to try to get a glimpse on how she was formed and how she was shaped by the gift, the charism. But let me say first a word about charism. Frequently, when people ask about our charism, they kind of expect to hear, what works do we do? Do we teach? Do we nurse? Do we do childcare? But charism refers to the spirit of the founder of the order, that particular lens, if you will, through which they have come to know God in a deep and personal and intimate way. And frequently it develops through an encounter, a personal encounter with God, Jesus, in such a way that it permeates the person and influences the path of their lives. Very often the charism given reflects the time and the needs of the time. So I'm going to start with her spiritual formation, her early formation in particular. In her early childhood, the spirituality of that time was devotional. Devotional meaning that there were activities and prayers that were said to express the great love that a person or persons had for someone. For instance, we have novenas in honor of the various titles of the Blessed Mother, or a novena to Saint Anthony, and all of that. But also at Mother's time, as a child, there was really strong devotion to the Sacred Heart. These practices and devotions were a vibrant part of parish life for her, and they became important seeds in her formation, her being schooled into the charism, if you will. You know, Mother didn't study theology or scripture or spirituality. What was normal in her time, religious formation was centered in the home and in parish life. And fortunately, she had really strong roots formed by both her family and her involvement in parish life. I'm going to skip ahead in her life to when she goes to study to become a teacher. The religious community of sisters who were in charge of the school were the Daughters of the Sacred Heart. You can see where this is going. It was common in those times for the students to live with the sisters. This was really wonderful for Frances. She had already expressed her desire to become a sister. And while living with the sisters and engaging in their religious activities, her devotion to the heart of God would have grown and developed. More and more, her understanding was to develop beyond the devotional to the personal. She was experiencing falling in love, deeply in love with that divine heart, the love that was pouring out to her and the love that she was pouring into the divine heart. So her formation is ever deepening. We sisters speak of ongoing formation because formation never comes to an end until the end. While she expressed her desire to join the Daughters of the Sacred Heart, she wasn't accepted, as in many cases, other religious communities also did not receive her because she had fragile health. This is an important backdrop that I think we need to keep in mind. The truth of her fragile health, because it was always part of her life, even with the pace of travel and the complexities of opening missions. She had fragile health. No wonder she kept saying, I can do all things in He who strengthens me. Another aspect of her formation of the charism was missionary. At her time, there were missionary priests returning from their foreign countries and sharing their stories and what was going on in those different countries. And some of those returning missionaries had been to China. Another seed is planted. So we have two significant dimensions, the Sacred Heart and missionary. And I believe that the opening line of our Constitution captures best the heart of Frances Cabrini's charism, and I'd like to read that. The very name, Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, expresses a way of life. We are to be bearers of the love of Christ in the world. The very name expresses a way of life. This is how she's being drawn into the heart of Christ and how she's going to live her life. Immersed in the heart of Jesus and pulled to missionary activity that would allow her to tell everyone of that heart of God. That intimate love calls out from her a kind of obedience. You know, when people fall in love with each other, they'll say, what can I do for you? Is there something you want me to do? And she promised Jesus that she would always do what he asked of her. So charism is not a work. It's deep in the marrow of a person. In this case, it was Frances Cabrini. If you have an opportunity to read the letters she wrote when she was traveling to and fro, you can glimpse how her love for the heart of Christ kept growing. Now, those letters are written in her time, so they can be flowery, but underneath, we can catch what was really going on between the two of them. Okay, her early formation. I'm going to now move to the context in which she lived, because her lived experiences also gave her great tools for how she was going to do this missionary endeavor. She grew up in a time that was marked by war, by divisions. Italy was in the throes of becoming united in one nation and not regional independent territories. Victor Emmanuel is on his way to become the emperor of all Italy, and he's going to take Rome. His henchman Garibaldi is leading the charge down to Sicily and taking over. To upend all regional governments, including the popes. Still at this time, the Holy Father had what he called the Papal States. He was still a temporal ruler. Now he is losing his temporal power and his temporal influence. Serious backdrop. At the same time, there was strong anti-clericalism. And add to that, the fact that the clerics themselves were at odds with one another. Those who supported the unification and those who were opposed. So all this is going on in her world. And there's also smallpox epidemic, not a pandemic, but she experienced an epidemic of smallpox, and she herself contracted it. So all of this is going on in her world, church and state, full of divisions. This might sound familiar to us, no? When she's finally able to enter a convent, it was an absolute disaster. She lived in a house that was divided. She experiences great suffering there with backbiting and interference with what she was trying to do. But she was able to hold her peace in the heart of Jesus and to help others maintain some degree of peace. As Jesus says in the gospel, a house divided cannot stand, and the house of Providence did not stand. All of this, all of her lived experiences and hardships, held her in good stead for times later on when she was trying to open missions. And just another little detail. She grew up in farming country. She would have had an appreciation for the land and the crops, for fruits and vegetables, natural beauty. And she also learned how water could be found. Another tool. So let me move to the missionary dimension. How she lived the charism given in her concrete realities. How she expressed her choices flowing from the heart of the love of Jesus. You know, we all know that she received a mandate from the Pope, Leo XIII, to go to America and attend to the needs of the Italians who had emigrated in large numbers. These immigrants were not only looked down on, but their lives were fraught with deprivations. There was little decent work, poor housing, almost no health care or education, and the children were running amok in the streets. And at that time, the church was very, very slow in America coming to their aid, if they came at all. We Irish. Okay. Frances and her little band arrive in a foreign country with a foreign language, foreign culture, a different kind of government. And from the get-go, she gets pushback, told to return to Italy by the cardinal. She's looked down on by other religious orders. She doesn't wear a veil. She doesn't have great fabric in her habit. Their first house was in a former house of prostitution. This was not a banner-waving beginning. But all of this she rode through in the obedience that she had to the heart of Jesus to bring help and solace to the immigrants. She had experienced many of these same things just in her own country. She was able to maintain a clarity in peace that let her go forward. She had a good sense of people and what we would commonly call networking. She was free to seek help from others. She knew how to make friends with people who had influence, people who had financial resources, legal people who helped her negotiate loans, permits, and contracts and purchasing land. And she found good, solid priests to whom she could turn to for advice. You know, even today, as then, immigration is a very complex endeavor. But there's something about her approach to this missionary endeavor that for me is just precious. She's very respectful of the people she's trying to serve. She listens. She and the sisters went door to door introducing themselves and hearing of the plight and their needs. Cabrini did not come with a master plan already in place to set up what she would do. She listened. And then she and the sisters would decide how to move forward to help the people. This seems to be the pattern of how she opened most of her missions. She'd send out sisters to learn about she'd send out sisters to the enclaves of Italian immigrants and find out what their needs were, what was the situation, what was needed. She began by going to the people, connecting with them, recognizing them as persons with dignity, and realizing the plight they were in, and also reassuring them of God's care and love. She learned this from seeing what Jesus did. She's expressing a way of being, a way of life. Nor did she start out with a lot of moralizing. Go to church, take care of your children. And she didn't start there. She knew that they couldn't. She tried to find a way to provide for them. She even visited them in the prisons. The way of being among the people to let them know they could turn to them in need was a manner of being present to them before setting up activities. And this is a missionary charism. You know, she would found houses, and often the houses that have chapels, and so the people could come to Mass there. She would have an Italian-speaking priest who would say Mass, and the immigrants could come. The children could come for religious education. The children could come for lessons. The women could come to learn different techniques in creative arts. She knew what was going on. She knew what was happening. She knew what she needed to do. And one of the ways she did it was to read the newspaper. I think it was Karl Barth. Don't hold me to that. But I think he was the first one who said that a Christian holds the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other. This has come down to us, what we now call reading the signs of the times. It's a phrase that's used over and over again in Vatican II. And if you heard any of us speak at other times, you know we keep saying we need to read the signs of the times, as we do today. This would be what motivated Mother to be informed and then to also reflect in the heart of Jesus what could go forward. In one of her trips to Italy, when she's reading the Italian press, she reads about a lynching of Italians in New Orleans. She also received a cry from the heart from a priest to come there and help. She did. As was her pattern, she sent 2 sisters to scope it out, find out what the needs were, look for possible housing, and let her know, and then she would go and settle the legalities of the house and set up the mission. But there's something, an element in her establishing missions, whether it was a school or a hospital. The sisters always would go beyond the mission to do catechetical work. In the case of New Orleans, they didn't stay at St. Philip Street. They went out to the outlying areas to find pockets of immigrants and attend to their needs, to give them a word of hope, to tell them God loved them, to give them some consolation. In the city of Denver, it was going down into the mines to visit the immigrants. They couldn't come to the sisters, so the sisters would go to them. This was always the primary mission, to make tangible the love of God has for his people. We can see that the mission was to proclaim the love of God, and the mode of doing that was to go out to the people and listen, and then find ways and means to respond to them. So that's a real thumbnail sketch of the woman as she's growing up, these 2 elements of the Sacred Heart and missionary heart. So how did it come through with our living this charism? Well, those of you who are in Pennsylvania, New York, New Orleans, California, Chicago, even Denver, Seattle, you know we had a great number of institutions. You also know that we have withdrawn from those schools and left hospital health care. There was often a great cry, how could we leave them? Because Mother herself started them. But Mother would never have wanted us to hold on to something that was no longer needed by the people who were most in need. She left works that were taken care of by other people. She was practical, she was realistic, and she assessed the possibilities. She would take risks, not knowing whether it was going to work out. She would see the needs and listen to the promptings of the heart of God on how to respond. She took many risks to establish a presence among the people in need. So you and I, facing all the signs of the times today and the great complexity of all of them, we need to discern if we're called to respond and the best way to do so. Facing these hard times fraught with complex situations, we listen to the unending news reports of the multiple difficulties. And what does it bring up from within us? Sometimes for me, it is just so overwhelming. And I have to sit back and say, oh, wait. I need to listen and read how and what do we understand of those situations in light of the teaching of Jesus in the Gospels. Is the Holy Spirit suggesting some response interiorly and externally? When we individually have listened and perhaps interiorly thought about this and prayed about it, Maybe we can share with others if there's a response that together we can make. But we want to make it in the Sacred Heart and with a missionary heart. Thank you.